I'm Clifford Humphrey, founder with my wife. We founded Ecology Action while I was a student at UC Berkeley. And I went to school originally to go into psycholinguistics. I wanted to know the history of language and learn how to make language really work for me, as to have an interest in the vocabulary that I was exchanging with audiences as I gave talks from Ecology Action's existence. Then, as I went further into my Berkeley required courses, I discovered this intense interest in the life force and how it was being not attended to, how it was being violated by the harvesting of minerals and trees from the Earth's surface. No thought about where we were all going. Back in 1968 through 74 or 5, the place was in a rush. There's all kinds of opinions about who was a this or that, including who was a communist or not a communist, a socialist or a Democrat or an independent, firm opinions and a lot of arguments, but nobody really knew where we were going. And so I was of such a personality, I backed off and didn't join in any of the arguments. Peter Camejo became a figure later on. I believe he was a vice president with what's the author of Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed. I went to San Diego, where I had lived, investigating where a convention was going to be at the, let's see, golly, these things slip my mind. I haven't thought for a long time. Hotel del Coronado, a wonderful, wonderful hotel. They were going to have as a guest speaker at like a Associated Press convention, the head of the government from Vietnam. It's going to be a most interesting program for all of us at Berkeley at that time. So I go down there to do a preliminary report on what we were going to do about his involvement. Well, the guy who was coming from Vietnam was assassinated, so that AP convention was called off. That's how fast things were moving in the 60s. They were really moving. So I want to tell you all out there sitting still today that I have experienced such a speed of development back in the 60s, and in my efforts to develop Ecology Action into a national movement. And we decided to make it an organic force rather than a bureaucracy with a headquarters. So we encouraged everyone to go their own way in a consistent way to preserve and understand the life force of the planet, but not to have any bureaucracy that needed a lot of funding. And so I did a lot of writings. I did a couple of tours, a combination of by bus and by train and by thumb, to get around the country. Couch surfing, of course. I'm calling it the dirty fingernail approach, because my future program I call the Pollinator Project. And maybe we can talk some more about that as we go forward today. But I'm looking ahead to a revived Earth movement. Over here, I have a planet on its axis. And so I can show students where they go when they go to sleep and it gets dark. It's not that the sun went down, it's that the planet spun around. And this apparatus is on casters. And so I wheel it around the classroom, and I can show you that half of the year when you go to breakfast, you are in an ascending configuration. And half the year when you go to breakfast, you are in a declining configuration. People find this sometimes unbelievable and they'll turn away. But it is true, as the our planet orbits the sun with its axis always pointing at the North Star, which happens to be the end of the Little Dipper, which is upside down also. So as we do that, half the time when you're going to breakfast, you're ascending, and half the time going to breakfast, you're descending. And you can prove this to yourself just by having a globe and walking around a light source, and you can see that this is true as we orbit the sun. These truths, and so my hope is that this, you might say, the tail end of my career of ecology action, that as we understand more of where we live, we'll understand the wonderment of it. It's all choked up already. The wonderment of it, and take better care of the earth and its wonderment, and realize that as far as we know, we are alone in the cosmos except for God. Could we say that? Is that a thing we could agree upon? And by the way, in water, I've had one amazing moment sitting on the edge of a swimming pool with water. I could feel the water coming into the pool on my ankles and feet, and I dallied there, feeling this water massage, you might say, a hydrologic treatment. And I came to have the wonderment of water. I wonder, as water, all life requires water. So is water more than just water? Is there some kind of spirituality that water brings to us? At least it brings to us a contemplation of all the movement that is going on. I'm getting overcome with my own rap here. But I have sat in the woods, say a point of observation, not in the woods, but looking out upon the woods, seeing the creek below me, trees and bushes and birds, maybe even a salamander or two, realizing that all have water. So water is, I think we're supposed to be what, 90% water, something like that. And it's, we are beholden to water. And that, in my world, gives it at least a spiritual aspect, and we might come upon to hold water in a higher degree than just a spiritual aspect. It is a creative force, and so on and so forth. And it may be that we have made a mistake of worshiping competing doctrines rather than realizing how simple an approach to the God force can be. I wish to make this part of my my elders, if you will, proclamation as I gather up my experiences and begin to move onward. But the pollinator project, we're going to have a regreening of the earth. We're going to realize we've made some mistakes. And so the one thing we have to do is take care of the pollinators, who are like the leading force of regeneration of the planet. And so I hope to introduce that here. Of all things, the place called Truth or Consequences, I will introduce this concept in Truth or Consequences in my own backyard. I have 2 ravines that would be very expensive housing lots to develop, but I shall plant pollinator seeds there and film how they go, and of the little group that I have here in TRC to work with. And I would encourage you, wherever you might be in the world, to think of this pollinator project, of making sure that we have those bugs, everything from butterflies to bats to migrating birds, to be fed and be healthy, and they can help pollinate the plants we need to have a green and healthy planet.
Wow. And can you give me an example? You had this wonderful example of like places that we don't often look at, you know, like these little corners where one road meets another and there's a water,
Yes.
you know, collection.
many of you realize we like to mow the sides of the road. We theoretically, I believe, do that so when folks who are smoking throw out their cigarette, we don't get a fire. Well, it's also a trough for the water. And here in New Mexico, you go out on the drive on the country roads, and you realize that the growth on the inside of the curve, the highway slants down to the inside of the curve, and so that little trough gets more water than the outside of the curve. And by golly, it's greener all the time. And so, yes, that is one of the areas where pollinator seeds can just be distributed. And the natural water and rains will bring them down to the ground, and some of them will sprout. So we are going to do this. It will be my policy, at least for the ones that I'm with here in New Mexico, to plant a stake of white, probably a 2x4, and drive it down to maybe only a foot coming up and put a number on it. And we're going to keep records of the pollinator habitat that we have befriended. And we'll just see how it goes. And I expect a lot of the plants selected will have blossoms. And so we'll have everything from the wild bees to the migrating butterflies coming through and feeding on these plants. And I hope to start it. And I expect the same positive reactions I experienced before with recycling when it became clear that that is the proper thing to do, to put your glass and cans and newspapers out on the curb. And we started that first program in a place called Modesto, California. And that's where all the Gallo wine bottles are made. And we had markets from a firm that made the blow-in insulation in the attic. That was out in Oakdale. And they would fireproof the ground to newsprint and then blow it in the attics for insulation. And since we had canneries in Modesto, they had a lot of spilled canned and leftover can stock. And so we could just add our tin cans and bimetal cans along with them. And then I went to Hayward and negotiated a market for the, who was that with? Reynolds, I think it was. Yes, Reynolds Aluminum. And we would grind up the cans. We blew the ground up cans into a 40-foot container, a 40-foot long container full of aluminum cans. That's a lot of cans. So in Modesto, we had drop off, we had buyback, and we had collection routes. So drop off, buyback, and collection routes throughout Modesto and Turlock. We got recycling on post-consumer waste, it's called. We got it going, and it was the right thing to do, and thousands of folks joined in. So I'm hoping the same thing will happen with the pollinator project. We'll have groups of 3 or 4 people all riding together now. No taking a convoy of cars out to scratch up a little dirt, you know. We're going to go out and scratch up some dirt and throw out the seeds to make sure the pollinators are happy as they do their part of regreening the planet Earth. So I'm tipping my hat and encouraging people to get ready to take on this pledge of the Dirty Fingernail project of the year. I don't know whether I'll pledge, whether I'll make myself part of Earth Day or not. This activity does not have to wait for a special day. To some extent, it'll be rigged to coincide with when you get your rains. We want to get them out there, get the seeds in the ground. And right now, I'm working with a thing called the Johnson Sioux digester being developed here in New Mexico. And that is the process of digesting organic material for a year without turning it. It's a technique that can be found on the internet, Johnson Sioux biodigesters. And that also yields you a liquid product besides the normal thing of a compost product. And this liquid product we can use to pre-coat the seeds that we plant for these plants that the digesters feed on for a good beginning, a good start of their growth. So we're looking forward to publicizing the pollinator plots and the pre-treatment of the seeds. We hope that will advance, you could say, home agriculture's return. I remember for World War II, we had victory gardens. You remember that?
I was growing up in the late 50s and the early 60s, and my dad composted, and we had gardens. He taught me how to garden when I was 7 years old. I thought that was pretty interesting.
I got in trouble, Robert, for eating the carrots while they were still young and very juicy. I just love that.
It's a fabulous way for youth to figuratively put their hands in the soil, but all that brings.
Oh, yes,
remarkable.
That's right.
And so after you've been a few rounds and a few seasons and a few gardens, you start to become more and more amazed.
I grew up in Pasadena, and we ate avocados on white bread still up in the tree. That's
wow.
What we did. Yeah, we would hope our folks wouldn't catch us up there, but sometimes we get careless and drop the bread loaf down on the ground, and we get caught. They weren't terribly upset, but it was possible to be distracted, squeezing avocados onto white bread in a tree to fall out of the tree, but we never did. We enjoyed eating it, yes.
That's wonderful. Where did you live in Pasadena?
All I can remember for sure, it was on Flower Street, north of Colorado, and there was one wonderful street that went north into the hills on both sides of the street with great big green trees. I'm sure some of the viewers will know what street I'm talking about. And I must say that my mom and her sister decorated floats for the Rose Parade.
Oh,
and
wow.
they came home smelling like a nursery, And they talked about some of the jobs they had, one petal at a time in some cases. Some of those floats, once they were constructed, they were worked on with decorations for several days before they were ready to be. In that day, they were almost all towed. Now, of course, I think they're almost all self-propelled. And as I was the oldest cousin, we carried ladders and planks up to Colorado, I think it was, wasn't it? Colorado Boulevard. And I had a pocket full of candy, and they all knew it. And so they were well behaved, and they knew that they'd get a handful of candy for carrying these planks and ladders. And now, of course, those are commercial sites for the most part. But back in the day, say I was 10, so not, and 48, in the 50s, it was different than being so commercialized as it is now. But we had great fun up there, setting up the step ladders and the planks, and then the adults would join us before the parade actually started. We had many offers of money to let others sit on it, but they were teasing us kids because they knew that we brought them up for the family. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
My father and his brothers were all into agriculture, and they knew that the orange trees were getting woody, they called it. They didn't know from the smog or what, but we had that as a family consciousness when we moved north to Paradise, where I saw my first movie, Swiss Family Robinson. I remember that experience to this day. Of all things, I was right down in the front left-hand seat, staring up at Swiss Family Robinson as part of my very early education, which I'm sure an anthropologist could probably figure out exactly what aspects of my interest were inspired by Swiss Family Robinson. But in Paradise, California, I also met a miner who was walking on a back road behind where we lived, and he was a remarkable friend to us kids. We actually sat down with him, and he told us about gold mining with a pan and water. And so I became an amateur gold panner from that talk and collected my own pan and knew how to put it in the fire to blue it. You get all the bluing of the pan in the fire, just like you make it a cook pan, you might say, and you blue it to make sure there's no uh, oil of any kind left. And so you swirl the around, and pretty soon there's a tail of the gold coming out of the black sand. That really influenced me as a kid that I could mine gold and be part of the history, Sutter's Mill, and so on and so forth, and California history. And one thing I'll tell you this because it's one thing I've never done, and maybe some of our listeners might want to do it. I've never gone into a corrugated drain pipe, the pipes that go under our road. It's a natural, what would we call it? Sluice box. It's a natural sluice box for black sand entrapment. And it could be that there's literally a fortune. When I did my gold panning, it was global controlled economy at $35 an ounce. And so I used to carry a little glass vial, and I finally gave it all away. $35 an ounce. It wasn't like over $1,000. I think today it's almost $2,000 an ounce. Yeah. And so I would suggest to you that might be my pleasure and be the first ones to go out and mine these corrugated drain pipes. Just sweep all of the debris out. And the hint of riches to follow through to you would be if there's any black sand in these corrugated drain pipes. And if you find black sand in them, sweep them all or vacuum them even clearly and have fun panning out the gold. It's a lot of fun to, wow. I just can't tell you how exciting that might be for you to pan that gold out of these drain pipes. Valuable, but it's also a beautiful, beautiful thing to pan gold. I'll pass that along as a maybe possible valuable comment I make today to you.
With regard to the pollinator project, like how do you engage youth groups, and are you engaged in youth groups? And here you are telling this beautiful story of what it's like to be outdoors, which is, yes. Something maybe we should share with our youth more today. But to answer the question, are you reaching out to youth groups to become expert pollinators?
No, not yet. But that's a very, as you've heard a lot of interviewers say, oh my, that's a very good question. I don't know why I haven't done that, but that is a wonderful idea. And I assure you, as I go forward, I will reach out to youth groups. I think that a lot of parents, maybe I'll find out that there's a fear. There's, for instance, here in TRC, we've just passed the money to actually put a fence around the high school, a cyclone fence. And there's going to be a great control over who comes and who's able to leave. Right now, as you know, the high school crowd is into driving around. The older students have cars, and they like to flee the campus for the restaurants. And I don't know if a clamping down is the right thing to do. I would be encouraging more field trips, I think, if I was associated with schools. And like this, what is this model? I got to get used. Yes, this model here is a foot diameter globe mounted on its axis. The axis always points at the last star, which is the North Star in the Little Dipper. And because how can I show you here? Because the I'm going to have trouble with this, aren't I? In other words, the orbit is always pointing to the same location. It's not like a ball circling the planet. It's different. It's a special kind of orbit with the axis pointing at the North Star. And so half the time you're going down to breakfast and half up to breakfast. And that's a part of this lecture you can take to heart, if you will, and try that in your house and realize there's a truth to it. And my belief is that if we understand more of, let us say, the astronomical aspects of our homeland, we'll come to have a better respect for it because it's a true source of wonderment.